Well, first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier on, he was one of my closest friends, and we had a relationship that you only really have with a close friend, in so much that he would text me before I went on air, or he would give me a call after I'd finished my show on the radio, and pick up on an interview that I had, or a track that I'd played, or something like that. So he was every bit invested in my life as I was in what he was doing, and we talked about everything. We talked about our love of music, of comedy, of Morecambe and Wise, Elvis, all these things that he loved, I loved too. So we had so much in common. But first and foremost, I was a fan, right? I was a fan of Chancer and City Lights. I was a fan of Andy's when he did Naked Video in the 80s, and I had the
Mm.
DVDs, and I went to see City Lights when it toured. There was two touring productions that he did, and so I was a fan of this comic character because, and I said this when I spoke at his funeral. I says I always knew that the sketch would be funny when I watched Naked Video because Andy was in it. I says I always knew that this episode of City Lights was going to be funny because Chancer was in it. But little did I know how good my life was going to turn out because Andy Gray was in it. And it's absolutely true because what he gave me, not just what friends do for each other. That's of course a given. He was the most generous, caring, loving man that I can think of. Not just financially generous, but just with his heart and his soul and with his advice. And were it not for Andy, I would not have fulfilled my that dream that teenage boy had at high school of going on to act. He was, we were in his dressing room at Panto one year, and I know I made a wee joke of this, and we often had a chuckle about it, but it's absolutely true, because I was saying to him, I love doing Panto and I love getting on stage at the Kings, but there's just this part inside me that I would just love to see if I can act, if I can do a play. And he says, "Well, I'll do a play with you." And I was like, "What do you mean you'll do a play with me?" And he goes, "I'll do a play. Let's do the two of us do a play." And I'm like, "How do we make that happen?" He goes, "I don't know, but surely you and I, with our resources and with our contacts, we can make it happen." And it was like, right. So the first thing we did was we phoned Karen Corrin, who runs the Gilded Balloon in Edinburgh, and said, "Look, we've got an idea. What do you think?" And she just went, scooped it up. She goes, "You two, so Grant and Andy from the King's Theatre, Panto, to do a show at the Fringe." Oh, she goes, "Absolutely, this has got to work." And she goes, "What play do you want to do?" And we're like, "We don't know. We haven't found one of those either." So we had to find a play. And as it turned out, we got a play that was written specially for us. A guy called Philip Meeks had this idea of a play. We met and we told him what we wanted. We didn't want to do a play that would just basically be a sort of spin-off of the Panto where it was all slapstick and comedy and routines. We wanted a bit of darkness, a bit of pathos, a bit of humor, and obviously comedy. So he wrote this wonderful play about these two men of a certain age who'd lost everything in life and ended up living next to each other in a bed sit. And they had one shared love of Shirley Bassey music. And that kind of brought them together. And then they went out in the dating scene and went on internet dating and blind dating and things like that. And obviously they had their own personal story, which came out throughout the play. And that play was called Kiss Me, Honey, Honey. We went on to win a Fringe first that year. And we were off. That was it. We were off and running. And then we went on to do a number of plays after that. And we did a play called Willie and Sebastian. We did a play called Double Feature. We did Canned Laughter with Alan, which toured around the country. And ultimately we rehearsed and performed a play called The Junkies, which was a brilliant concept for a play. It was about guys who just bought and sold old furniture. They went and did house clearances. So it was
I
that kind of
remember
junkies.
that.
And so we did it. We rehearsed it. We opened. The first night at the Fringe, Andy's diagnosis came through the next day, and we cancelled the run. And the show never ever saw the light of day after that. But we did, Double Feature was probably one of the most special things that we did because it was written by Phil Differ, and he was a massive movie buff, and Andy's a big movie buff. I love my movies, and this play was all about friendship, and two of us played these guys, two guys who were going back to their childhood cinema that they used to go to as kids to strip out. It was getting turned into luxury flats. So we reenacted our favorite movie scenes. We reenacted the things that we got up to as kids, playing all the parts ourselves. And the sort of twist in it was what happened at the very end was that it was revealed that I was a ghost. I was dead. I was his friend who died years before, and he'd just been talking to himself for this whole time. And the reason I was there was because I had died due to his, shall we say, cavalier approach to the job, and he was off at the bookies and drinking and things like that. So it was all to do with guilt and regret and all that. And it was fantastic. And again, when he died, I kind of looked at that whole experience and kind of thought, well, okay, that's it done, because how else am I going to act now? How else am I going to get an opportunity to act? Because it was just me and him, and that's how we did it. But then unbeknown to me, it's like he's up there creating magic. The opportunity to go into River City came along, which was no doubt connected to Andy, because we had talked about me going into River City as his young son. Which he very much enjoyed me saying that. But yeah, it was that was that was the kind of thing we would have loved to have done. I would have loved to have gone into River City with him, but it wasn't to be. And when the opportunity came in, I thought it was them kind of asking me to come in and do a sort of wrap up for his character, because that was the one thing that he left the show, but he hadn't finished off the storyline for the character. So I kind of thought that might be what I'm going to be doing, but it turned out it wasn't that. But it just feels nice because Andy was such a big part of River City. So for me to continue is lovely.